I'm Zach.
I'm Mike.
And you are listening to the However Podcast, your favorite father and son duo.
That's right.
Yeah. So today we wanted to talk about anger. You know, it's one of those things, it's consistently a problem, especially for men. I mean, this is something as I'm kind of going into coaching and I'm really wanting to, or we are really wanting to focus on men's problems specifically. It was one of those things that I just kept seeing over and over and over it's a real struggle for men to, just understand and then deal with specific emotions like anger, fear, sadness, resentment, guilt, all of the typical negative emotions. For the most part, men aren't necessarily taught how to deal with them or what they even are. It's not like the typical male experience to talk about your feelings, you know?
Oh, yeah, okay, so I used to do training. I did a lot of training, and one of the things I trained was about emotional intelligence. I mean, I kind of did some training around that. I'm trying to teach people how to teach other people how to be kind of emotionally intelligent. So I did this activity, and the activity was half the group would go to one side of the room, and there was a list of emotions. And what they would do was they would try to evaluate on that list of emotions on one side of the room, what do those emotions look like for women? And then split the class. The other side of the room would do the same list, and they were doing the same evaluation of how it looks for that emotion in men.
Oh, you know what I would do? I would do? I draw a bunch of dinosaurs. Anger's the T-Rex, and fear, that's the little guy. The compies. Little compies? You know little compy dinosaurs? That's fear.
I'm not quite sure where you're going, but I'm going to finish my story.
I'm just saying, if you say I gotta explain it and I gotta draw it out, I'm drawing dinosaurs.
Well, most people used words and sentences.
That's the dinosaurs are way cooler.
Inevitably, what would happen is I would have this evaluation, and then people would be on the other side of the room, and I go, okay, on this side of the room, what do you guys think? If we're talking about jealousy, what does jealousy look like for women? And they would come up with a list of things that women would do that
Velociraptor.
That would, so this is what a woman acts like when she's feeling jealousy or when she's feeling sadness. And there were all these different ways that women would express that emotion. And you go to the other side of the room and I go, okay, for the guys, what does that emotion look like? And it would be like jealousy. Oh, that looks like anger. Okay, sadness. Well, that typically looks like anger. And you go through the whole list, I swear to God, every single time. And I taught this class for like 3 years. And in every single time I taught that class, it was the same outcome. Women had the language to express their emotions, and men would express their emotion. And no matter what the emotion was, typically it turned out to look like anger.
Everyone. Okay, so why do you think that is?
Why do I think it is?
Yeah.
I think that there's all kinds of psychological reasons, but I'm going to get down to 2 reasons I think are pretty typical if you're talking about the why that men always turn to anger. Okay? 1, I actually think that socially that we don't do a good job. Now, I think the younger generation's getting better at this because we've become more, I've watched the younger generation become more literate men in their emotions. But in general, we don't do a real good job teaching men and boys how to express that emotion, because if they're learning that from their dad, well, okay. If their dad just acts angry all the time, no matter the emotion, then they're seeing a social representation of that and they're just replicating it. So they go into life thinking the same thing if this conversation is. So I think socially, we don't teach men or boys how to deal with those emotions in any other way than anger most of the time. And that's what they see. I think the other part of it is that the anger emotion for men is the only acceptable one, or has been the only acceptable one in our society for a long time. So when you're sad, don't cry. Okay? Push it down, push it down, push it down. Put whatever that thing is on the shelf of anger that you have right here, And inevitably, somebody in about 2.5 months is going to get the benefit of that sadness because it got put on the shelf and it'll eventually come out. All right. So I think those primarily, I think those are the two things. Is one, we don't teach it, and two, we don't allow or we don't give permission to have other emotions because those aren't manly. It's not manly to say, well, I'm just really sad right now, and to be able to name it. So I think that's it.
Okay. Couple things I wanna however that. So one of
That is the name of the podcast.
So however, to your first point, the fact that you say if it's taught by men, then if that man is, just an angry person, that's how, the boy is going to learn and all of that. So
it's called social learning theory, by the way.
Right. Okay, whatever.
Taught by Vygotsky.
Okay, it's called Shut Up.
No.
So, anyways, the fact that right now we are living in a very fatherless society, meaning all of our young men are being taught by their mothers, wouldn't you say that's probably a good explanation for why this younger generation is more literate with their emotions, is because most of them don't even have dad around to be angry. I mean, they're raised in more in a mother's environment where that's the only thing that they get exposure to is talking about their feelings.
I'm going to say yes and no. I don't completely agree with that because in the society we're in, where fathers are more absent, I don't want to call it fatherless because by definition every child has a father. I actually hate that word because it just releases men from their responsibility. If it's fatherless, that's crap. So I'm going to say where the father is not engaged in the process of raising the child. All right. But I believe that the media that people watch, and quite frankly, some of the other influencers out there that are encouraging and or teaching, I mean, young men who may not have a father oftentimes go looking for other role models.
Which is exactly what they're doing. That's what we're living in right now is a lot of these young men, they're desperate to find a decent male role. Honestly, not even decent, any male role model that's giving them some sort of advice on how to be a man. They're taking all of that in. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, which is another danger for another episode.
That's another episode.
Let's oh God, what is that word? Not diversify, but have a oh shoot.
We'll have that conversation.
Anyways,
later.
Yeah.
So yes, so I agree with you, but I think that there's enough societal influence on it where it is still promoted across media and movies. Yeah, glad you found the word.
It was gonna bug me unless I said it. Discernment. That's the word I was looking for.
So I think that society actually still runs the show when it comes to the media. And right now, media is a bigger thing than it ever has been.
Yeah.
And I think kids are in the media more than they ever have been. And they're spending more time in media than they are with either of their parents.
Which is really troubling.
Which is kind of dangerous.
I mean, yeah, wasn't it like 35%? They only spend 35% of their day talking, like having a genuine conversation with their parents. So the rest of the day, or maybe it was lower than that.
No, that's not
35 minutes.
Oh, yeah, 35 minutes.
Yeah, that wasn't 35%.
That's a high.
It was, 35 minutes are spent
amount
with their parents in actual conversation. Yeah. The rest of the time, they're getting their ideas, their morals, their values, their everything, their identity from whatever they're looking at on their screen. That's a really scary thought.
Okay, and I'm going to say 35 minutes is generous because I think when you're talking about quality conversation,
that's what.
Unless families are sitting down at a dinner table and they all put their phones away and they have a 35-minute dinner where they have that conversation, I think that's really generous, and I don't think that's typical. So I see where you're going with the idea that men aren't as involved in their child's upbringing because of the society we're in, but I think media still drives that idea. And there's more kids in media and they're looking for, and honestly, I think that kids are always looking for a female role model and a male role model. Whether or not they have it at home or not, they're always looking for it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to however you back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had another point, but I forgot.
Okay. What about the second thing?
Right. I mean, I was gonna. Okay, so repeat what you said. Let me recatch my train of
See, now I
thought.
have to think about that. So what did I say? So number two, anger is the only accepted.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the only accepted emotion,
So well, okay, but
or
see,
secondary emotion. Let's just because
right. Well,
we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll lead into that. But my however to that is it an acceptable emotion? I mean, societal wise, I mean, it feels like that's actually the emotion that is the most unacceptable because that's the thing that we're being blamed for. Is we're the angry sex. We're always so angry. We're always so violent. We're always so, we're so hard headed and all of this stuff. And it's like, okay, but anger feels like the only acceptable one that we know how to respond with because it feels like nothing else is acceptable. But at the same time, our anger is also bad. And so it's like they're asking for two things at the same time. They're asking for a contradiction. You shouldn't show any emotions, but even if all of your emotions that we're not letting you show bundle up into one mess called anger, you're not allowed to show that either. You have to push everything down.
Yeah.
And anger is just the result of pushing everything else out of the way and saying you're not allowed to feel that. So that's where I think I disagree with you a little bit. Is it's really not acceptable, but it's the only thing we know how to do if we aren't allowed to not even necessarily express, but understand our other emotions that drive behavior.
Right. So I agree with you. I'm going to agree with you. I'm not going to however you. However, media still pushes anger and it's okay. So one of my favorite movie lines ever is in a movie called A League of Their Own with Tom Hanks. And you know where I'm going
I
with
know where
this.
you're going.
I mean, come on. There's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball,
There's
sir.
no crying in baseball.
Okay?
She's crying, sir.
She's crying, sir. So here you have this movie, and it's promoting this idea that as a man, you do not cry.
Yeah.
Right? So if you can't cry, what do you do with sadness? If you can't be a little depressed, if you can't have a down day,
you bundle it up and
you put it on the shelf.
You keep moving.
You pull up your bootstraps, as we used to say in the old days. Back in the day. I hate it when people say that, especially me.
You pull up your Crocs.
Sure, they are pullable.
And they got a speed setting.
So when you have that, that's the only emotion. Like, okay, what else are you going to do? So when I say that it's acceptable, I think that it is the one that is actually promoted in media as the thing that you can do, and then everyone thinks it's funny in media.
Right.
It's funny when Tom Hanks does
and again,
that.
to me, the word acceptable is still troubling to me. To me, I think it's more like expected, not expected as we want, but expected as it's
a guy.
It's an outcome. It's a very normal outcome that every guy is going to do. Every guy has his bursts of rage, his bursts of anger, his emotional dumps or whatever.
And
it's not really. It's not even that it's acceptable. It's expected. We know it's going to happen.
Right. Okay. So let me ask a question. What makes it so normal for men to have those bursts of anger? Is it just that we're shoving everything down and every now and again we have to have an outlet? Or is there something in guys that actually drives us to actually be a little bit more, and I'm going to use the word aggressive.
Right.
Because, like I said, everything, when you look at the list, everything looks like anger. It doesn't matter what emotion you might be feeling. Every guy kind of goes to anger. But isn't that one the one that is the most normal for men to express because of something? Or let me ask, is that the one that's the most normal to express because of something that's inside us about how we're made?
I mean, anger is obviously a normal emotion. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, we wouldn't have it if it wasn't normal.
Well, sure, because everyone gets angry. Right. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. We just happen to be talking about dudes.
Right. So I think under certain circumstances, it is a very normal thing to react with. Because that's what it is. It's a reactionary, it's a secondary emotion. It's not something that is just out of thin air. Now I'm angry. There's always something it seems like there's always something that has to drive, that has to drive the anger out. There's always
An underlying
an
emotion.
underlying emotion or response or whatever that leads to anger. And I mean, it's very biological. When I was kind of researching it, it was going over the fight or flight response, and pretty much that's where anger takes the front row seat. Is And it's mostly in the fight response, not necessarily the flight. Because if you're in a flight mode, then you're probably not angry. You're probably afraid. So, but usually fear is what comes 1st. And
Mhm.
so that's where you have to make the distinction of fight, anger, flee, fear. That's usually where it's going to go. And so anger is extremely, extremely important to you in cases where you need to fight, in cases where you need to hold your ground in some way. And again, the body responds with that. All the blood rushes to your arms, your legs, and your brain in case of immediate action. Your pupils dilate so that you have more awareness of your surroundings. I mean, there's a very biological response, and usually when you're going into that fight mode, you've also got increased heart rate, increased adrenaline, increased oh god, there's a couple of things I can't remember exactly, but it's that anger that is triggering you for defense for the most part.
Mhm.
And so the problem is we allow all of those responses to be used in situations that don't really require it. But the response happens first. So you get stuck in that mode, and I'd assume, and this is kind of what I've been through, is my first response is just go with it. I mean, it's there. It's at the forefront of my brain. Why not use it? Or I'm not even really thinking why not use it. I'm just thinking I'm angry. I need to do something about this, and then I'll explode into a fit of rage, and that's where. I mean, this is obviously that's a problem that I've had for a good portion of my life, and thank goodness I've been able to overcome that and get around, or not necessarily around, but more so understand my anger, because it's been very prevalent in most of my life. Is I was a really angry kid going up into high school. I was a really angry teenager going into my adult life. I was a real angry adult, and I finally had to figure out what the hell it was. And that's where I kind of have done a lot of my own work in understanding not only what anger is, but I mean the kind of what you were talking about is there's always something that comes before. And that was the biggest breakthrough that I had, was figuring out what came before that anger. Because if I can name it, like you say, you name it. What is it? And once I've named it, once I've figured out what that emotion is, then I can deal with the actual problem, and the anger eventually dissipates. I heard it takes about 20 to 60 minutes technically before the fight or flight response will or your body will like readjust, yeah, to normal environments. But
Sure, but and so okay, so what you're talking about is when you're talking about emotional intelligence, and you look at some of the research that's done. There, what you're talking about is doing a short circuit on the anger emotion, because with men, and this is what I was asking was, is there a biological connection to anger? And I think you said it when you said fight or flight. If you think back into the prehistoric days, let me go way back into history. The fight or flight was actually because there was life-threatening things that were going to eat you at any moment, and so you had to be prepared to either fight or run. Okay, so when the saber-toothed tiger, you're out there and you're just kind of picking flowers, or you're going out to get water or something at the
cavemen
stream.
did that. Yeah,
They did. They picked flowers, and hey, they were romantics. But they're out there, and all of a sudden, there's a saber-toothed tiger behind you that looks at you like you're a meal. Okay, so life was different, and so with those folks, they would get that out because it was a real thing that you had to deal with. How much actual potential death do we deal with on a daily basis in our current society?
less than 5%. Probably like a 1%
Right.
if that.
So it's
If
not
that.
it's not a daily event
Right.
where we are like, oh my god, I'm going to die. I could die today. Although,
But we are the ones that catastrophizes our own surroundings, and
Right.
because when I was looking into it, it can be a response to things like public speaking. Is that thing is triggered, that the fight or flight response? It's the same reaction if you have an intense fear of public speaking. So it can be a mental thing.
but that's the thing. That's exactly what I'm saying. Is that we have a biological. There was that when we as humans were created, we have a biological response to aggression. Right? There is a biological.
Is it aggression or fear?
Well, we have a biological response in aggression, and that's what what the fight is. So when you have a biological, it's still built into us. We haven't changed that much. I mean, I've seen some people; they still look like cave people. It's all over the place. I won't name names.
That's good.
But we still have it. That hasn't changed. There's still that biological thing in us. So it builds up. It's there.
Right.
So every time that something little happens, it's like, oh my god, that was.
Well, it's a response to acute stress. That's what fight or flight is.
That's right.
That's all it is. It's a response to acute stress.
Except acute stress is very different for us today than it was 1,000 years ago.
And that's the thing when you're thinking of, okay, all it is what causes me acute stress, and that's where you can figure out where that is going to trigger. And
but but do we really need that much aggression? Do we need to go after our acute stress nowadays in the same way they did when the saber-toothed tiger was standing behind you?
Obviously not, but it's still important.
So the only way here's I'm getting back to your point, because I promise I have a purpose here, everyone. The point is that when you name it, that response is still there, that aggression, and when something happens and you're in acute stress or something triggers it, when you name it, you're actually short-circuiting the biology. That's basically the answer to how do you control this biological thing that goes along. And men have more testosterone. Then biologically, that's what makes dudes is testosterone.
It's a pretty significant source of where aggression can come from. Is the more test you have, the more aggressive you're going to be.
That's right. So to short circuit that, you actually have to rethink what's going on, that's what naming the emotion is. Because once you name it, you're short circuiting that aggression response. Mm-hmm. And then what would have come out looking like anger comes out looking like understanding. Right. And that's where, when we're talking about anger, and I want to see if we can define it, because anger as a secondary emotion, I feel like it's never the first trigger.
Right.
There's always some other emotion behind it, whether it's sadness, whether it's jealousy, whether it's fear, whether it's any other emotion you can come up with. Anger is a response emotion. I don't just get angry.
Right.
I don't wake up in the morning.
Thing. Yeah.
I don't wake up in the morning and I'm like, God, I'm just pissed.
Right.
No, something usually.
Well, unless you wake up and you've got like a leaky ceiling.
Well, yeah, but then you have a trigger, and then it's frustration.
Right.
Frustration then starts to look like anger when you start throwing things at the leak.
Right. And usually, and I think that's a good point, is usually anger, it's almost like the action that follows other emotions. So it's an emotion, it's a secondary emotion, but usually anger comes out in actions. So it's kind of like, right. So it's like you can almost define anger by the actions you take based on the emotion that you're feeling.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a different question, and then we're going to get back to anger, because I think this is important. How do you know if somebody's crazy? How do you actually know that somebody walking down the street is just they're a couple cans short of a six-pack?
Well, they're doing things like...
Yes.
They're
behaving, right?
That's what I did, yes. I behaved.
Was that a behavior? I'm not quite sure.
It was a trigger. I had, God, it was really funny. I had the hardest time not making eye contact with someone yesterday as I was driving home, and totally unrelated. Driving home, and I have my windows down, and I hear out of the corner, out of like this side, I hear this dude, obviously a homeless man, obviously just cracked out of his mind. He's just screaming. I mean,
Okay.
it's just like he's screaming, he's yelling. I thought he was screaming at me, and I thought if I look at him, he's going to come over here. And so I'm like, do not.
Don't look.
It
Just don't
sounded
look.
so interesting that I really wanted to just see what was going on, but I'm like, do not look. He is screaming at you, and if you look at him, he will come over and kill you. Because I was like stuck at a red light, so I'm like, I cannot look over at this man. Anyways,
Don't engage.
so-
Don't engage.
but
Don't engage.
I didn't know he was crazy because he was shouting and screaming.
Okay.
And anyways,
Sounds like the same guy walked past my office the other day. So, if you don't know when someone's crazy until they act, because if I use myself as an example, if anybody actually got into my thought life, half the stuff that I come up with, or even my dreams, people would be like, "Oh, that guy must be back ass crazy." Okay? No, you know what? I have a frontal lobe that allows me to monitor and adjust for my crazy thoughts.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So you don't know if someone's crazy until they're acting crazy, because crazy is about action. Doesn't that kind of appear to be the same thing with aggression and or anger?
Mhm.
How do you know if somebody's angry until they start behaving in an angry fashion?
well, and right, I mean, I completely agree with you. The problem is any type of behavior that may seem aggressive can also be um, misplaced with assertiveness, which is kind of what we were kind of briefly going over this yesterday, because assertiveness and aggression are two different things, but a lot of people who technically, well, and a lot of people who have a hard time deciphering emotions, they'll see the same emotion connected to both
Right.
behaviors,
Right.
but it's totally different because assertiveness is basically directness without anger. Aggression is directness with anger.
Yes.
So it's
I'm
like,
going to agree with you there.
right. So it's sometimes it can be hard to tell whether someone is actually angry, even if they're behaving. I mean, obviously, if they're in a fit of rage, if they're throwing things, if they're screaming, if they're punching, all that stuff, obviously there's a pretty clear indication that someone is angry. But if someone is being direct with you, you have to understand, and this is where it's like you got to know emotions pretty well to be able to decipher whether or not they're actually angry or whether they're just being direct and assertive with you.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So when we define it, how do you know when someone's angry? Well, they have to act angry.
Yeah.
So is anger, I mean, I asked this question and I know the answer to it, but it's just for thought. Is anger really an emotion?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Yes, it's an emotion.
It is
I
an
agree.
emotion.
But that's why, we keep talking about this as a secondary emotion, because when a dude is sad, typically they will act angry.
Right.
When you ask most guys how they would react if they found out that their girlfriend was hanging out with some other guys, and they get that jealous feeling, the emotion of jealousy,
It comes out as anger.
they're like, "Oh, I'm pissed. I'm going to go beat somebody up," right? Or I think this is the funniest one because it happened with my granddaughter. The Rams, my favorite football team, were winning a game. And something happened, and I got excited. I was happy. And I jumped up and I yelled, "Yeah!" And it scared the bejesus out of my granddaughter, who thought that I was actively angry. Okay? So even my joy experience came out looking like I'm an angry dude. Okay? Because it was loud and I was growling. So this is why it's so important to name it, which is going back to what you talked about before. Name it, short circuit that, and then explain it to yourself and to anybody else around you.
Right. I know. I always feel like everyone thinks I'm such an ass because I look so angry.
And if they
all
only
the time.
knew the truth.
I honestly, well, and really, when I'm looking angry, when I'm just doing whatever, I'm not. If someone were to ask me, "Hey, dude, are you angry?" So I'm like, "No, I'm chill, dude.
Right. I'm thinking.
Well, even if I'm not thinking, I'm just like, no, I'm actually kind of peaceful right now. I'm good. There's nothing wrong. I have nothing to be angry about. But my demeanor makes people think that I'm angry or I don't like them or, whatever the case, which is honestly, it becomes difficult making friends because no one wants to talk to me because they think I'm angry. Anyways, totally off topic. But
yeah, we'll talk about all of that in another episode.
no, we won't. No, we won't.
Yeah, we will.
No, we won't.
We're gonna.
No, we're not.
We're gonna go there.
We're not gonna go there. No. So, I agree with you that it's really important, and then I think that last point to explain it, that's really, really important, and it's something that not just men, I mean men and women, pretty much everyone has a really hard time doing because we always expect people to just know.
Right.
Everyone does it all the time. We expect people to know exactly what we're feeling or thinking. I mean, shouldn't it be obvious? Shouldn't it be obvious that I'm angry? Shouldn't it be obvious that I'm sad? Shouldn't it be obvious that I'm, feeling whatever? It's like, no. Most people are actually kind of hard to read unless you have professional training in reading people's emotions. Like really, it's a difficult thing to do.
Okay, so this morning actually is a pretty good example of that. Is that I woke up, my wife was up, and when we both got up, she didn't talk to me. And I mean, normally when we wake up in the morning, we're both kind of in the kitchen and we're gonna go in, and there's usually conversation, and she's just quiet. And 15 minutes later, we're still quiet. And I start being like, I'm a typical husband. What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? Did I say something?
Did I shit the bed again?
I was. Shut up. I don't do that yet.
Yeah, when you do, I'm gonna have to clean it up.
Yeah, okay, we've got that on film.
No.
Take care of it.
I'm just the favorite. I'm just.
Oh, no, okay, come on now.
No, I'm the favorite because I will.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Anyway, so at one point, we're in the bathroom together, and I finally look at her and I go, "Are you okay?" She goes, "I'm fine." And I go,
"Uh-oh."
No, and I'm like, Did I do something wrong? I mean, am I the problem? I mean, I'm like asking. I'm just, Joe, I'm like, is it me? And she goes, "Oh, no, it's not you. Yesterday I was just dealing with all kinds of stuff, and I'm just, I'm just upset." And I mean, unfortunately, we didn't have time to have the conversation because I really am interested in hearing that because I want to support my wife. But my immediate reaction was, "Oh, good. I thought it was me." I did something really wrong, and I'm so sorry if I did. But if I didn't, I'm still sorry, and I hope you have a better day.
So it's like you dodged a bullet, but you kind of set yourself up for another one.
But I mean, it was up to me to actually be like, okay, one, I need to have the cojones to ask the question, because if I did do something wrong, I want to know about it. I don't just want to go through my day thinking my wife is hating me for something I did.
Right.
And it was up to her to explain, "I'm not mad at you.
Right.
I'm not angry at you. I'm feeling," and she said, "I'm feeling frustrated with something that happened earlier in the day." And it was a relief. It would have been a relief either way, because one way or the other, at least I knew.
Right.
So I think that's a good example of why is it so important to explain. Or let's say that you do have to be assertive with somebody, and that person happens to be sensitive to, somebody being assertive, because there are people out there that are just really sensitive to that. They don't take to it well. And so if you start a conversation with, "Hey, I just want to let you know first off, I'm not angry. Mm-hmm. I'm not angry. But this is something we probably need to deal with because I feel like we've got a problem here." Okay? Mm-hmm. So you start with that. "I'm not angry. I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. I'm frustrated. And you start naming whatever that emotion is, name it, because then you actually open up the conversation. Mm-hmm. So people can engage without fear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
So, and I think that one part that's really important is, obviously, if you're the one that's conveying anger, you have to know what you're going through so that you can explain it.
That's right.
That's right. That's, I think, probably the hardest part is you have to stop yourself. You have to take the responsibility of stopping your actions before your anger gets out of control and try and and look for what came first.
What was the trigger?
What
Yes.
came first? Like, what is it? And sometimes, and again, that's like, that was a really hard thing for me to do, because going into that anger is so much easier, and it lets you just vent and explode, and then the moment's gone. But it's like, you have no idea who you're gonna hurt if you do that
Right.
on a consistent basis. I mean,
Yeah,
really,
the
that's
damage.
Right, the damage that can cause.
Right. Okay. So think about that. When you're causing the damage, you might feel better because you just unloaded.
Right.
But now you're doing 3 weeks of damage control in the relationship that you just hammered.
Right.
And that's where it's like,
so,
okay,
and that's kind of
5 minutes of thought is way more useful than 3 weeks of damage control.
Right. So, and that's the point of the episode. So, guys, like, really, that's what we're trying to get to, is if this is something that you have a problem with, take it from a couple of dudes that have had some serious anger issues. I mean, really. And we've both had to figure out a way to reconcile that anger and figure out how to not necessarily get away from it, but understand it.
Well, and here's the other thing too. It's okay to be angry.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's just make that really clear, that we're not saying that you need to go ahead and slough off the idea that anger is just the emotion you don't express. Just know what it is and walk into it understanding where that came from, because it's okay to be angry when someone hurts you. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, and so to that, one of my favorite quotes when it came to anger was, "It's okay to be angry at the right place, in the right time, with the right person, in the right amount."
Yes.
Meaning, don't dump all of it on some rando when the moment strikes. I mean, because that is the worst possible thing. So it's not that the anger is the problem. It's how it's used is the problem. You have to use it at the right time with the right person. I mean, I think that's probably the most important out of the four, is we tend to direct our anger at the wrong person.
Right.
So someone else is dealing with, kind of like what you said earlier, is it's on the shelf, and you're just dumping it on the least suspecting person that happens to come into your radar and slightly piss you off.
Right.
And we do it to the wrong people.
Then we unload the shelf.
Right. We do it to the wrong people, and then we tend to always do it with the wrong amount of anger. That, you know, and again, this is something I've been through. The thing that I directed my anger to was whatever I found near me. And at the time, my biggest thing was whatever game I was playing. It was usually the controller that was getting the brunt of my anger. The controller or the headset, or at one point a door, which you had to fix.
Yeah, fix the door.
Yeah, I remember that. But and I mean, that wasn't even caused. That was caused by a different situation. And it was totally justified. But
it still wasn't your door.
No, it wasn't my door. No,
it was the right person at the right door.
Right. But I mean, honestly, that was when I finally started to recognize that I had to take control over my own anger, is when I had to start paying for it. Because it wasn't only that I was ruining, I was damaging our relationship because they breaking all your stuff. But at that point, that was when I had my first job, and so I was buying all my own stuff, and I was breaking all my own stuff, and then I had to go back and buy it again, and so I had to sit down and be like, all right,
I can't afford this.
Right, I can't afford this anymore. I think it's time. I can't deal with another, $80 headset broken because I got mad for about 5 seconds. It's like, that was completely unacceptable to me.
Yeah, that type of anger is for rich people.
Seriously. Seriously. I mean, if you can afford to be angry, then
sure,
go ahead.
If that's what you want.
But you also, it's much more expensive to repair a relationship.
Yes, it is.
So,
and it's less likely that you're going to make the repair completely. There's always a scar.
Right.
So,
so that's really what we're talking about. So we're trying to give you guys at least some solutions from a couple of dudes that have dealt with this many
and
times.
are still dealing with it. We're not perfect. Here's the thing, guys.
Right.
We're still working on this stuff. We're actually still. I mean, there are days when we're still like, wow, I suck at this. We all go through it, and so we're not saying, hey, we've found the answer. What we're saying is we're starting to find some answers, and they're more effective than what we've done in the past. Now, before we run out of time here, because we are watching the time on this one, I wanted to bring something up because I think that there's something that we haven't talked about yet. And that is what I think, and this is my thought, Bible according to Mike, the emotion that will cause the highest level of anger and aggression in any man, the emotion that they feel that will drive anger more than any of those other we've talked about. Fear.
Oh, I thought you were going to say lust, greed, pride, maybe.
Okay, but I want you to think about that. Lust, greed, pride can all actually come from fear.
Mm-hmm.
At the bottom end of most men, when they react in the highest level of anger, I would say that 90% of the time, it's actually because they've experienced something and it makes them afraid.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at jealousy, okay, let's just take that emotion for a second. Jealousy is, I'm feeling like I've been left out by my spouse, my friends. I mean, jealousy doesn't have to be about a dating relationship. You can be jealous because you've got a really good dude friend that you play, video games with.
Your best friend has a new best friend.
Right. He's got a new bromance, and that's just not cool, man.
Yeah.
But when you come right down to it,
you're afraid of losing.
You're afraid of losing your friend. You're afraid of being alone.
Yeah.
You're afraid of, okay. So I want to just say to guys that it's okay if you get to the bottom. Let's say you're doing this evaluation, you're trying to short circuit the anger. It's okay to be like, hey, I'm really afraid, and I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid of not having enough money to pay my bills at the end of the month. I'm afraid because when you get that behavior, a lot of times, I would say the majority of the times, what you really come down to is a fear response. When I have my anger only really shows up, most of the time, it really shows up when I'm driving my car. Mm-hmm. All right? And the times when it shows up the worst is when something happens and somebody does something stupid in front of me and I don't see it, and I almost get in an accident because of someone else's stupidity, and I just explode. I mean, I just come unglued in my car, and what it's really about was that scared the living bejesus out of me to almost get in a car accident. I was afraid. When I rode motorcycles, it was like that. I mean, the worst experience I ever had was when somebody cut me off when I was on a bike, and I almost died because of it, because they just about ran me over, and I was livid.
Which is, it seems to be a common trend, because most of the like biker videos that I've seen, they're all very angry people, or not all. There's a lot of them that are very angry because they deal with a lot of those kind of situations. There's a lot more fear in riding a motorcycle, so it's
because it causes fear. They're afraid of dying. When you're on a bike, you're vulnerable.
Right.
And when someone does something stupid in front of you in a car, you're the one who's going to die because you don't have any protection.
It's immediate acute stress.
Right. So what I'm saying is that be aware of that. Mm-hmm. And be okay with saying, God, that made me really scared. I was really afraid at that moment. Because if you don't short circuit, I mean, you could say, oh, that really frustrated me. Okay, well,
that's typical.
That's typical. That's fine. But really learn the language of getting to the emotion. And I encourage you guys to really think about the fact of, was I afraid? Because that is the thing that most people, if you really want to talk about a society that downplays an emotion for men, fear.
Right. Men are not allowed to be afraid.
You are not allowed to be afraid.
If you're afraid, you're not a good protector.
You're a wuss.
Right.
Okay? I'm sorry. You know what courage is? Courage is not a lack of fear. It's facing fear amidst very dangerous situations. Mm-hmm. So, hey guys, it's okay to be afraid. All right?
Yeah.
And claim it, name it, short circuit that anger, and maintain the character of your life by not unloading on the wrong person at the wrong time with the wrong amount.
Right. It takes a lot more character to be able to step away from a fight instead of just throwing hands.
Right.
It takes a lot more character to back yourself away from hurting someone you love, someone, close to you, whoever it is. It takes way more character to back away from your own anger and find a better path, a more constructive path. That's what character means.
That's right.
It's about taking the more constructive path, even though something might be telling you that they deserve it or they asked for it.
And you know what? They might.
They might. They absolutely. Most people do. Honestly, most people do.
That's right.
But
reality is, though,
it's not constructive. It doesn't help anyone, and it certainly doesn't help you.
Right. Well, and the fact that when I get mad in the car, one of the things that will short circuit my anger in a car is when I look over and I realize that the person who I'm angry at doesn't even know they did anything.
Right. It's a 4'5" grandma with a big old sunglasses who can barely get her head over the steering wheel.
And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, that person's blood pressure is fine right now, and the only person that this anger is actually affecting is me.
Right.
Okay.
Just remember, they have no inner dialogue.
That was a different. You're right.
That was a previous episode, but that's what it is, and sometimes that's what it takes.
And you know what? And so really, it doesn't do anybody any good.
Right.
It doesn't do me any good. So what's the point?
Right. You can be joyful in their stupidity.
Right. You can just be like, all right, whatever,
right. Whatever,
and move on, because that just doesn't help.
Yep.
All right.
No. So if you guys like the video, leave a like, leave a comment. How do you deal with anger? That will be interesting to know.
Yeah,
and we've got a couple of them. You know, there are tons of different outlets. I mean, obviously, we didn't get to talk about that very much, but you know, everyone's got their own outlet. I like to use the gym for a lot of my anger. It helps me just, you know, let a lot of that stuff out. So what is your outlet? How do you deal with your anger?
Right, we bowl like 3 times a week, so you know,
I almost went bowling today.
Really a good outlet.
Really
so we would love
bowling.
to hear those, or hey, we would love to hear comments about. That, I mean, even just a little thumbs up would be kind of cool, because
any feedback is good feedback.
Feedback would be great. We would love to hear from you guys.
Yeah. So leave a like, leave a comment, make sure to subscribe so you guys don't miss any more episodes. All right. Have a good one.
Bye, do it.